I think you're wrong though. I think the first is also a word.
Say what? Say what?
First is also a word.
I
Like
know that's a fair point, but
yeah.
um, well, we can agree to disagree. I think it's I no, I love that disagreement between you and I because it fosters much more much more interesting fodder for thought. Um,
I mean, it's true that it is. Well, on one level, yes, it's word and number, but really, it's like really the only numbers that existed were one and many, maybe two after a while. It's like
right?
they exist as words. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
they're,
But the
they're
thing is
verbal concepts, right?
I also incorporate um, the technical definition of information or like the physical definition of information into my information kind of worldview in that any phenomenon generates information that describes it, even just raw data, like saying this particle moved 9 microns to in 9 degrees 12 minutes or whatever westward or whatever, so like that's data, that's information, right? And it's so tying back that to my words or numbers thing, the instant the instantiation of a word generates information right along with it, right? So numbers and the most fundamental unit of that information is numeric or quantity is quanta, right? So that's kind of how I think about it. It's like you is the moment of utterance, the precise beginning of utterance is also the precise beginning of quanta. So it's a simultaneity, and that's why I believe that number and word emerged at the same time.
Yeah, except I just don't. I don't think that those quanta exist until we develop language to identify them. Um,
Okay,
so,
I
so
would
that
argue they existed before the language, or well, yeah, we're talking about a singularity, almost, or like we're trying to quantify a point in time that occurred at an infinitesimally small moment after the singularity, right? So like,
well, except the singularity is also a story that develops later, right? Like it's not like there was no singularity, for Blake, he would say, like, yeah, the world is flat. We don't experience a round world. Like, he's not saying that's literally true, but that's what we experience.
hmm.
Um, and uh, we only experience things through our senses, uh, as they happen, right? As they happen. So anything else is an abstraction. So
Right.
this is I think this is what Blake borrows from Berkeley, like
Uh-huh.
Berkeley's idealist philosophy. It's like the only reality is perception. Um,
Right.
so he's called he calls himself originally an immaterialist. Um, Later he
Hmm.
calls himself an
Blake does or
idealist.
Berkeley does? Berkeley?
Berkeley does, yeah,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
yeah. Um, but really, what he's saying is he's not denying matter. He's just saying that matter always is coupled with um, thought, with perception.
Right. Right. I agree
So,
with that.
so then none of these sort of, so it's sort of his argument against Plato and maybe Pythagoras, right? Eventually he goes that far back, right?
Hmm.
So Pythagoras would say, yes, there are numbers there that are eternal, or Plato would say there are archetypes there that are eternal. And
Uh-huh.
then Berkeley would say, no, the only thing that is eternal is perception. And perception is eternal, but it's not. It doesn't exist in an abstract realm beyond perception. So
Right.
I think that's maybe the split, between words and numbers. Like numbers only exist in an abstract realm, unless you say they're created by words first.
Right. Well,
Do you see what I'm saying? Or
I do. I do. And yeah, I mean, well, the other thing I mentioned in that podcast is that everything is true. So if I really mean that, then we're both right.
yeah, yeah. That's the that's the Jainist point of view. It's everything anekantavada. Every side works.
Yeah.
No, it's not a big. No, I'm not. Of course, I'm not offended by that at all. I think it's a great disagreement too, because it gets right at the heart of everything.
Exactly.
I'm
Exactly.
just.
I love and it's almost like, I mean, my willingness to kind of put myself in the shoes of your uh, perspective on it, um, is, is something that I strive to do always in general. Like I always try to, I don't like to be firm, um, in any position, or at least not for too long, because I never am. And, you know, especially when you're getting down to those like core kind of ur, uh, concepts. I mean, it's on like to me, it's almost, not repellent, but when I encounter people who are really firm and like, no, this is how it all began. I'm just like, all right, okay, well, I envy your certainty there, buddy, but that's quite an assertion to be making. Like who knows? I'm fascinated by just cataloging and collecting all of the different versions and theories and beliefs that have existed throughout history about what that can be. Not ever expecting to find anything definitive, because how could it be? How could anything definitive like that exist? It's just, for me, it's fun to just keep riffing on how all of these different ideas and beliefs intersect, how they differ, what they have in common. You know, because I'm probably not going to find out until I'm dead.
Oh, if that, I don't. That's another question, I guess. But
Exactly.
yeah,
And I said
um,
probably. I said probably.
yeah, um, uh, yeah. No, the fun thing about that is no. The reason why that's such an amazing point, the words and numbers point, is because if you do really think about what that means, it it's like a fundamental difference almost,
Hmm.
perhaps. So it goes right back to the idea, like the biblical idea. In the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, right? The Logos, which is Christ, right?
Hmm.
But Christ as Logos, as God, um, and the original Word was fiat lux, let there be light. Um, so in that sense, it's like, okay, so that's the first word that comes out, and so all of the universe comes from that word, derives from that word, and maybe splits off, like the spectrum of light divides and keeps dividing. Um, but at the same time, then what about the ideas in the mind of God, right? And so you can go a step further back and say,
Before the ideas that led to the utterance, you mean?
yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So then you could go further back and say, haha, those ideas are archetypal and numerical, you know.
Right.
So that's an interesting point. But then I think you can go further back again, right? And so there's what we're talking about on the email thread, right? The idea of pata, and then beyond that, nun being sort of this matrix, or this fluid medium, chaos basically,
Right.
where even the gods, even the creator God, comes from, derives from. So at that point, yeah, at the point of chaos, yeah, you're right. It's like you can't say it's number or word. It's just potential at that point.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Here, wait. I'm going to forward. Have I ever shown this to you? Here we go. Come here. Right. Copy. Ptah wasn't from Egypt. He was from Earl.
He was from where? You are. That's interesting.
So have I ever told you about my? Well, yeah. I just thought it's funny that HTTP backwards is Ptah.
Yeah, that's right.
I made that one day.
Can I get off just for a bit? I've got a Bruno quote that I've got to find for you.
After this, remind me to tell you my Ptah theory.
Well, you can tell me as I'm flipping through this. This is a guy actually, McIntyre, talking about Bruno, his philosophy. So in Bruno's philosophy, number itself is not an absolute but a relative determination. It does not touch the number of the thing itself. Nature has no difference of number as we have, of odd and even, tens and hundreds, nor do the gods, spirits, or other rational beings define the numbers and measures of the object in the same series of terms. Both numbers and the method of numbering are as diverse as the fingers, heads, and mental equipment of the numberers. But this was not the quote that I wanted. It's an interesting one, but it's not exactly the one. No, I'm not seeing it. That's alright, yeah. I'll find it some other day. It's just for the sake of argument.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't find it. Okay, yeah, I'll send it to you some other time.
Cool.
Anyways, Bruno's amazing. Like Bruno.
I need to read more of him. I haven't read him directly. I've read
Frances Yates.
Yeah, Frances Yates.
Yeah.
And she's okay. Her writing is a little dry for me, but.
Oh, really?
I'm just some stuff is just hard for me to read. It's just, I'm not a good reader. I just said, oh, really? Because sometimes
people blame her for the opposite, that she's not academic enough in her style. But she's pretty good. Like people fault her for her interpretation of Bruno, but I think she's still got it. She comes the closest, really, to his entire spirit, I think.
That's good to know. Yeah, I should revisit that. I never finished it, but
he's such a strange sort of liminal thinker, though.
Right.
Or maybe he's not. Like that's how he's taken sort of the mainstream opinion of Bruno, is that he's this guy coming out from the medieval mindset into the modern mindset. But he's really not, like he in a way you could say he's gone beyond the modern mindset. Like he's of course he's saying things like the whole idea that the Earth is at the center of the cosmos, and that there's 7 spheres, and then the fixed stars, and then the primum mobile, and then the Imperium beyond that, like that whole sort of Aristotelian kind of cosmos. He's saying, well, that's all bullshit, right? And that's what the scientist now sees on and say, see, he's a proto-modern thinker, right? But at the same time, he's saying, yes, there are infinite worlds, and he's way more advanced saying that than anyone else, right? Like
Yeah.
but he said that there are infinite worlds, but they are all propelled by the soul, you know? And
Uh-huh.
so at every point, matter is coupled with spirit.
Right. Right. Well, I agree with that.
So yeah, he's basically he's a pantheist
Uh-huh.
before Spinoza, and this is an essay that Joyce wrote on Bruno using that guy McIntyre, that quote that I read from.
Uh-huh.
He did a review. Joyce did a review for McIntyre's book on Bruno, and that's a point that Joyce takes from this book, is that people say that Spinoza is the God-intoxicated philosopher, really, but he's saying really that title should go to Bruno, you know, because that's an interesting thing. Like even Spinoza, he tries to order it. He orders all of his arguments geometrically. Like he has this system of geometric reason. And in a way, this is sort of an argument against Spinoza, is that he puts reason beyond God. Yeah.
Mm.
So that God is sort of subject to reason, and that's even reflected in Spinoza's own books on philosophy. He tries to capture this geometric order in his philosophy texts. So the problem with that is, like, it's not really God; it's reason that you're putting at the head of everything. So Bruno's beyond that. He's saying it's matter, you know, and that it's not even matter as we. It is matter as we sense it, and that matter as we sense it is sort of actualized matter, but then actualized matter always sort of drifts back to potential matter. And so those are sort of the two levels for Bruno. So it's a complete pantheism, but it's a matter-based pantheism.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I mean the potential for matter concept is very much in keeping with what I was talking about on that podcast, like that, you know, that potential is always kind of existing, and it's the information underlying it that's describing that potential that ultimately manifests into matter. Matter, like I said, matter as media. You know, it's
Yeah. I remember that part. That's great.
expression. It's an expression of it, you know, of that potential, right? And so there's some kind of traversal, maybe from the spirit to as that traversal from spirit to matter occurs, or that coupling, maybe is eternal, or maybe there's some way to unpeel it and like, you know, once again, another point I made is that you know, we always, for some reason, we perceive phenomena in sequence, right? So you could consider like the spirit giving rise to the matter as a process, as a linear process, not necessarily suggesting that that's the only state in which it exists, right? But we have that capacity to perceive it that way, which is helpful, right? Yeah, so I mean that tying back to the potential idea is like that's what makes me it makes me think of my thoughts surrounding, there's just this ether, or whatever we want to call it, is this unpotentiated stuff, whatever name you want to give it, a technical name or a mystical name, whether it's information or spirit or whatever, and then as it transitions into the material world, it takes the form of what materialists would call matter, right? And yeah, I'm just kind of rambling now, but
it just becomes actualized in everyday forms of
right.
matter.
And that's also to my point about not necessarily being opposed to the materialist view. You know, I think it's just another instantiation of, I mean, it's the extension and progression of our the human capacity to, we perceive events in sequence. And so science, just is continuing to go down that path of perception. And the further down they drill, they're finding, well, that's why quantum physics is so mystifying and so counterintuitive, right? Because they finally kind of gotten to that primal layer where our idea of linear time and things happening in sequence and one particle being in only one place breaks down completely, right? And so
it almost seems like what's happening is their concepts are breaking down
yeah,
at
right,
that point.
exactly.
Like they're looking, but it's not as if how can I put this? It's not as if they're discovering anything fundamental about the nature of matter. They're finding something fundamental about the nature of their own scientific concepts.
Yeah, absolutely.
That their concepts completely break down into nothing. And
right.
it may be that is the fundamental flaw of science, right? And I think this is what Berkeley is talking about, right? It's like, and Blake also, like this focus on the particular, like everyday perception, individual everyday perception is all based on the particular, right? Like it's not, there's no generalized abstraction in our perception. We just, like, when we see this book on the table, we're not thinking of the archetype of, like, the form of book, the Platonic form of book. We're just seeing this particular object that we happen to call a book.
Right.
But science only deals in generalities and abstractions, right? Like it's.
They everything is based on, like, they're always taking snapshots of a prior present, right? And assuming that record that they've made, that they're now, from which they're extracting formula and chemical composition and everything, they've abstracted our actual. The reality is that we don't ever really experience present, right? Where it's this ephemerality of it is impossible to grasp. It reminds me of just the comic routines of saying it's now, and then it's now, it's now, and it's like it never is now. It's always it's weird that we have this. We do perceive things linearly, but that in itself is an abstraction. Like awareness and consciousness is fluid, right?
Yeah.
So, and I mean, go ahead.
Are you saying the same thing that it's basically the idea would be that it's all now, it's all now. Like we're sort of surfing on the edge of now, constantly.
Right.
But this like I've heard this idea like countless times where it's like, okay, your eyes take in a signal and it takes you a split microfraction of a second for your brain to process it and whatever, right? And so you're not actually in the moment, right? You're sort of out of phase of the moment, just very, very slightly or whatever, right?
Yep.
But that's the abstraction, It's like, no, we're not. What we experience at the moment is the real, It's like there's no other real, So it's like I think this is the major point Berkeley's making, It's like science has to get more and more into perception, and maybe that's a problem because science isn't really qualified to explore perception from the inside, because perception is always singular, singular from moment to moment to moment to moment, exactly. From person to person, organism to organism.
That's
right?
Exactly what I'm talking about. Like we're granularizing and atomizing or like your point to the particular. We're particulating this something that is actually fluid, and it's like the difference between an analog and a digital waveform.
Mm-hmm.
You can endlessly zoom in on an analog waveform, and the beautiful curve never breaks down. But if you zoom in close enough on a digital waveform, eventually it's a stair-step pattern, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Where there are these breaks. And
Yeah,
I mean, that's
missing information.
right. I mean,
Oh.
that's because digital audio is just literally a sampling of nanoseconds in time.
Yeah.
And it's like the equivalent of pixels,
It's like a
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. And but at the same time, it's still accurate. It's interesting that it's even though it's an approximation, it's still sufficient in terms of like we reached a fine enough level of approximation that we can't tell the difference unless we magnify it somehow, right?
Because our perception fills in the details, right? Like
exactly. That happens with all of our senses.
But that's the thing. Like we are constantly doing that, anyways. So
right.
it's like so in a way, digital is always analog.
Well, it has to be. That's the other thing is that when you play a digital file on a music player, it still goes through a converter that converts it to an analog signal.
Right.
Because you can't. It has to do that in order for it to be actualized into physical, air.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, it's interesting. But what was I going to say?
I just meant it more metaphorically than that. It's like
it's both. It's both.
Yeah.
And we do that. We fill in those gaps emotionally. We fill in those gaps literally. Sensibility. I don't even know the sensitively, whatever the word is. Our senses.
Well, basically, what it comes down to is there are no gaps. There are absolutely no gaps.
There are no gaps.
So the idea of there being a gap is the abstraction.
Right. Well, that's good. That's that discernment point, right? Is that it's a survival mechanism to actually perceive the gaps or to perceive the figure from the ground, even though there is no actual separation. Like the nipple is not an isolated thing floating as an island on the breast. It's connected to the rest of the skin.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. All distinctions create the gap for sure. Yeah.
Right. But it's the capacity to distinguish and to discern has obviously benefited us greatly as a species, and I mean, any species. I mean, that's the whole, the evolution of the eyeball. You can trace back to just a very simple binary system that detects light or dark, right?
Mm-hmm. Anything with like fight or flight, right? Like you need split second decision on what a thing is. Like obviously, yes, we need to differentiate things in our reality in order to survive.
Yeah.
But even that decision is gapless.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that it's interesting again. So I wonder, future course of science, right? Is that the future of science? Is getting more and more into perception, and more into singular perception. Like everybody's looking for the singularity, but we are the singularity. It's the singularity is this present moment.
I think that science has a rough ride ahead in the sense that, I mean, this is my biggest complaint about science, especially popularization of science or like in media, is, they have tapped into poetics as as a vehicle through which to express their very complex ideas to a lay audience.
Mm-hmm.
And but in doing so, they're betraying, in a way, their own principles. Value judgments of those principles aside, right? It's just an act of self-betrayal in a sense, because the way in which that they are, and also just this idea of they rely on language just as much as literature does.
Well,
but
for sure, yeah.
Right. And yet language is this fluid thing that does not hold up to scientific scrutiny in terms of its capacity for ambiguity, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. So I think, so if you're saying, if what you're saying is, by moving into poetic description of itself, science is betraying its own method. I would agree with that, yeah. And then the opposite is true as well. Like you have somebody like Terence McKenna whose worldview is basically poetic, and yet he's sort of betraying himself by trying to put it into scientific or faux scientific terms.
Well, that's what makes him so interesting. Is that he's in that kind of conflicted zone, right?
Yeah. So I think that's I don't know. I think that is the limitation of science. It's like you have fuzzy mathematics, right? Fuzzy numbers, and
Mm-hmm.
I think more and more it's going to find that reality is fuzzier and fuzzier. And what is more fuzzy than actual conversational language?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what it's going to turn to, and then at that point, science does turn into poetry,
Mm-hmm.
It does abandon its old method and becomes poetic.
It's going to have to. It's going to have to. I mean,
how else? So people like Luke are going to be the future priests again, they'll be the scientist priests.
Yeah, and just as an aside, that guy, my God, I don't know how he does it. His poetry, it's so good.
Yeah, especially he does it off the cuff on the street. Like
that's the stuff of his that I admire the most. Mm-hmm. Are the little things he writes on the street. I mean, I don't know how he does it. And I've sat with him for hours while he's working, and just to see the reactions that he gets, it's beautiful. It really is. And I mean, I've seen him move people to tears, and it's just, yeah, man. I mean, no wonder he wants to be famous. He deserves to be.
Yeah, I would love to see him at work. I wasn't able to do that.
Yeah, it's a sight to be seen for sure. I mean, wow. But yeah, getting back to it, it's like, I think, and this touches right upon this idea of science relying on language, I mean, and this is very pedestrian, but these theory of everything pursuits in science, and most of the most interesting scientists in that pursuit don't really even like that term.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, how can a theory of everything only reside in the realm of physics and science?
Yeah, exactly. Once, by saying that right from the start, you've already limited everything.
Exactly. It's like, emotions are part of everything.
Yeah.
Love is part of everything, and hate and fear and
just your own swirl of emotion and perception and memory and movement and everything that you're doing from second to second, is everything, and
right.
that there's no way to describe that through science. Like there's nothing even approaching that. Like there's of course they're studying the processes of the brain and so on, but to study that kind of fluid, like, I guess it's a phenomenology, right? Like, but you can't explore that through any sort of application of the scientific method, you know, because it is so singular. Like I guess you can, and they do this, you know, like they can take a huge sample of people and get their reactions in a certain way. The whole sort of behavioristic psychology of things, right? And so
Yeah.
they can do that, you know. They can sort of, like, obviously they can predict what you're going to do at a certain point to pretty good accuracy, right? But there's no way to get inside and be Wall-E, you know, at this moment, you know, like, and that is,
For sure. Elon Musk is certainly trying to make that real.
I don't think he ever will, you know, because
Yeah.
even if we succeed, and even if I succeeded in doing that, like jacking my consciousness into your body and even your brain or whatever, right? It's still my interpretation of it, you know.
Yeah, and it's still my body.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that's the biggest, I mean, and AI development, which, you know, I'll spare you my tirade about that, but I mean, they have made great strides in terms of confronting that notion that, you can't simulate a mind, a disembodied mind with that and expect it to behave anything resembling human intelligence.
Yeah,
Because,
this is Penrose, right? Like I
yeah,
heard you talking about it. Oh, I didn't hear you. I saw I saw you writing about
right.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he won the
I've
Nobel
read
Prize.
Penrose talking about that, the impossibilities of AI for those reasons.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, well, my take is that AI is just, is basically, um, always, well, AI is Atlantis. It's always existed along, it's abstraction. You know, it's as soon as we, um, externalize our capacity of abstraction, AI exists, and so it's always existed. And in my definition, and I talked about this with Eric McLuhan, like, you can trace the history of the concept of artificial intelligence all the way back to antiquity,
mhm.
and you read, if you assess, or if you look at the assessments of what such a thing would even be, or what it would do, or what it would be capable of, all throughout history, it's always a corollary to just what humans are capable of, right? So,
Mhm.
like,
Mm.
and so we keep, it's a carrot and stick kind of situation, right? Where I mean, just in the last 50 years, you look at it and it's like, well, a successful, a realization of artificial intelligence should be able to play a game of chess and defeat a grandmaster. And we did that. And
Mhm.
then, and as soon as we pass that point, it's like, well, we haven't invented AI yet, because now we know it should be able to do this. And then we make it do, or,
It has to be you at Go.
and
Yeah,
yeah, it has to
yeah,
beat you at Jeopardy. It has to understand
yeah.
natural language. And they did that. And it's like, well, we don't have it yet. So they keep nudging forward this, expectation of what AI is, not necessarily realizing that it's been there alongside us all along, and we just keep redefining redefining its scope, and
Mm.
so that's my take on it, and I see what Penrose means about it being impossible, but it's semantics, really. It's like, it's impossible only because it's always been possible. It's
Right.
it's existed alongside us for as long as we've been able to abstract and store that abstraction in some kind of medium. As soon as we externalize our instincts or our ideas into some cultural artifact, be it another brain or an object or a symbol or whatever, or a word.
Language, yeah.
Language. Right? As soon as that happens, that's artificial intelligence, as far as I'm concerned. So, but again, it's a semantic kind of loop.
Yeah. Sometimes that's danger. That's dangerous just to say things are semantic. You know, that gets used often, but it's usually the case. Well, this is semantics too, I guess, but it's usually the case that the terms are different, right?
Yes. Well, that's the problem. That goes right back to our point about science relying on poetics, right? It's like they're muddying their own waters, so to speak, in reliance on this infinitely ambiguous system that we have of language, right?
But I think they're muddying their waters because they're finding that the waters are muddy. You know.
Well put.
You know, like that's why they're getting fuzzier and fuzzier with their math, and because and more indeterminate and unpredictable, because that's what it is. And basically, they're looking. I think they are getting closer and closer into this idea of singular perception. You know, like that's. I think that's what they'll find is the structure of matter, like, but at that point it makes no sense to even call it the structure of matter. You know, it's like,
right.
So then at that point, like I said before, it's like then the bards come back into play. You know, like,
exactly.
You guys you haven't had a job for decades. Well, we got a job for you now.
Yeah, that's one of the underlying themes of White Goddess too, right? Is like the one. As far as I got through that book, I really worked hard. I got about halfway through it, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, speaking of fuzziness and numbers in science, constantly like, you know, wading through the mud of the water. The one scientist I think who is actually, you know, come closest to an articulation of this problem is Mandelbrot. I don't know if you've ever looked into him much, but he's really worth some time to examine because.
No, I only know it. Yeah, I only know him from the obvious, right? But
right. But the story behind his discovery of fractal mathematics is a good one to know about, because especially from people like ourselves, looking at how the discoveries that he made, finding noise, and because that was actually the kind of you know, the bug that bit him. He was working, I think, for Bell Labs or IBM or one of these companies, and they were trying to he was tasked with trying to find a predictive method to predict noise in signals. And that was the germ of his fractal concept, was actually when he analyzed he noticed that, like, I'm going to paraphrase this poorly, but he analyzed signals and started zooming in on them in terms of like the frequency of noise occurring in a signal, and found a fractal kind of timeline, I guess. You know, he stretched it, and he noticed that no matter how much you zoomed in, he kept finding these kind of dimensionless patterns, so to speak. You know, like kind of like the fine structure constant is this dimensionless unit, right? You can measure, no matter what your scale is or your measurement approach may be, this 1/137 ratio keeps emerging at
Yeah.
any scale through any dimension, right? And he kept, and that's a kind of fractal concept too, right? It's like,
Sure.
anyway, but yeah, and the thing is it's, what's interesting is if you research the history of fractal mathematics, it's this very fascinating and interesting and curious and intriguing thing, but the conclusion is, at least from the more scientific or materialist point of view, is that like, well, it's just a neat thing to look at. We don't really know how to apply it to anything. I mean, there's been a few examples like fractal antennas, like in cell phones. They discovered that they like by several orders of magnitude increased the receptive capacity of an antenna by laying it out in a fractal pattern.
Mm. See, I would have thought that they would find uses for it all over the place. Like what about like solar panels or something like that? There must be.
Maybe, I mean, there have been a few interesting applications in or real world kind of practical applications. The other one is actually in radiology, like they've used in terms of, I think it's like machine learning algorithms that they've used to read, like mammograms and stuff like that, is somehow rooted in fractal math. I'm not, it gets a little too technical for me to explain it beyond that. But, no, there have been there's a handful of successful. The other thing is cartography, right? And
sure, yeah.
Accurately measure completely
coastlines
and stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean.
So yeah, I wonder. I really wonder when the gods are going to come back. That's the big question for me. You
think they left?
Well, they've left because we've forgotten about them. Is basically
we've abandoned them.
Yeah,
I think
Great Plan is dead.
There is certainly a void that is that in society today left by their absence, and that is active, very, very not aggressively, but will just intensely being filled by all of these kind of well, I mean, that in terms of like our political climate that exists today, I feel like there is a kind of we're in this desperate state to fill this void that spirituality has always, filled for us. And I think that people are desperate to like find or apply themselves in a meaningful way and fill their lives with meaning, but they're also atheists and reject, that something spiritual could satisfy that.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like it's almost like it's what we're missing out on is the full intensity of matter, even, like I thought that the other day, just going on the beach, and just looking out over the ocean and up at the sky and the clouds, and just like thinking what this experience would be to a culture or to an individual who was part of a culture that believed that everything was filled with gods, like you'd see the clouds, and the clouds wouldn't just be this idea that we have now of just basic vaporized water, like we think like that, and they're not meaningful to us. But somebody from maybe like a primitive, we say primitive anyways, mindset, it's like looking up these clouds and you see meaning reflected. You see a personality there, a personality that can interfere with your life and create good things for your life and maybe create evil things for your life. You know, it's
Right.
like, and everything is like that. The sand is like that. The water is like that. The the rocks, even your clothing come from animals that have spirits in them. You know, the whole thing is just infused with meaning. You know, and that's a completely different way of thinking of the world. You
Right.
know.
Well, perhaps the problem is that because of the success or the material success of something like the scientific method, the fact that we quote unquote proved that clouds are water vapor are just a collection of vaporized water. We took that as a we quote unquote proved that, and therefore it's like, well, then we can replace our old mystical definition now, and it's like, well, not to negate the scientific assessment of what a cloud is, but it's like that shouldn't necessitate replacing this more spiritual interpretation of it. Why can't we honor both?
Well, but that's the thing also, is like, how do we know? Like the primitive people would say, of course it's it's rain, you know. Of
Right.
course it's just like, so they know that too. That's Blake's idea of double vision, you know. It's like,
Yeah.
like of course that's what the sun is, you know. On
Yes.
one level, but it's also the
That's what I'm saying.
the Hallelujah choir. Yeah, exactly. The
Why
Hallelujah
replace?
choir of angels, you know. It's like
And that's exactly my point. And not necessarily just because I believe in idealism doesn't negate my belief in materialism either. It's kind of let's celebrate both, and and in doing so discover even more, and on both sides of that equation.
Well, that's what you realize reading Berkeley. He's supposed to be one of the first philosophical idealists, but he was a deep believer in matter. But all he said was that matter is always coupled with perception. You know?
Right. Yeah.
So it's like it's just a really radical view of what matter is. You know, it's like matter's coupled with perception, and it's entirely infused with living spirit, the gods, living plural spirits. You know, like
Right. I wonder it's radical though. I mean, there's an inherent neutrality to that worldview. It's like you're not siding necessarily with any one view. You're saying that it's a sphere that has no sides.
Yeah.
Right?
Neutrality in that sense, but in the other sense, it's like it's a roaring madhouse. Also, you know, like that's schizophrenia, right? Like
Right.
that's what we call schizophrenia in this society, like a materialistic society. But it's exactly what you said. Like, so you have this split from the Renaissance, where you have somebody like Bruno who's able to see spirit and matter as being one, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens is that spirit just it becomes deism. So deism is like God is there, but it's somewhere beyond, and the main point of God is he's the clockmaker who winds up the clock and lets it run. And then eventually it's like, of course you're going to come to the point where it's like, well, how do we even know that clockmaker is there at all? And then the eventual point of saying we don't need a clockmaker, you know, the universe just runs, it's just clockwork runs on its own. And so what's happened is spirit has been sucked out of matter completely, you know. So it's not even matter anymore. It's like a pale reflection of what we used to think of as matter. Like matter is the mother, you know. Matter is what matters.
Exactly.
You know.
Yep.
But we, I don't know. Yeah. So I think that's where things will head eventually, is the gods will come back. And this is what all the poets have been saying for ages now.
You think it'll happen in our lifetime?
it's happened to me on occasion, where I could feel it,
Mm-hmm.
So it's like,
Me too.
Like I'm, like by that you mean, I guess, like the whole society will realize that, or
Well, the apocalypse, I guess.
the revealing.
Yeah.
What?
That's what I love about that graphic novel Promethea, is that that's the kind of the climax is the apocalypse, and they Alan Moore takes advantage of the modern kind of misconception of what that term means, and you think that you're building up to this kind of cataclysm, or catastrophe, right? But it ends up being the ancient, or the biblical sense of the term, right? The revelation.
Revelation, yeah.
And the world does not get destroyed at all.
Yeah. So, yeah, what happened in 2012?
Right. It seems that they were 8 years off.
Yeah, well, maybe in the cataclysm way of thinking, but maybe not in the revelation way of thinking.
Well, I think that. Do you remember that Alan Moore quote I read on the podcast about the doubling of information?
Yeah. Do you know that that's actually from Cosmic Trigger?
Okay.
He quotes that almost exactly, if I can find that in Cosmic Trigger. But
I'm sure he's read that.
Yeah, if I can find, I'm just flipping through. I don't know where it is, but it's actually from a French statistician where Robert Anton Wilson gets it.
Okay.
So.
Well, I mean, my opinion is that, and this is also, I keep coming back to stuff I said on that podcast, but we've crossed a threshold in terms of just the amount of kind of the bandwidth that now exists between each individual person alive today, in terms of the technology has opened the levee has broken, in terms of now we are, it's another flood myth, right? I probably mentioned that to you before, but like I have this this speculative theory of several millennia from now, if anthropologists or aliens or whatever were to examine artifacts left over from this period talking about the digital age, they would interpret, they're like, oh, we found another flood myth. It's like, because the figurative levee has broken in terms of just the amount of information that is being transferred is, I mean, it's like a pipe works. I mean, it's staggering, and we're seeing the effect of that on society, like why it's retrieved in a McLuhan sense, the tribalism of the past, and like I said, maybe this is a bump in the road as we develop through our technological and spiritual adolescence, that we just have to wade in this mess, this muddied water, so to speak, of culture, really.
Yeah, when I was listening to you guys talk about that, I was also thinking about, okay, so we have this this idea of the doubling of information, right?
Yeah.
And it, yeah, for sure, everybody realizes that there's more and more information, so-called, like more and more new things, right? But there isn't sorry, I'm trying to do two things at once. There isn't the same sort of quality of novelty all the time, like the creation of the wheel or whatever, right? Like that's a huge breakthrough, right? And so or just inventions as they go along, like just basic inventions like that, you know.
Right.
But we're not the new information that's coming out at the moment now all the time. It's like it's new, I guess, but it's not at that level. It's not fundamental, you know. It's like
Yes. No,
um,
most of it's all rehashed. It's all just recyclables, you know. It's all just
so is that actually information in that sense? Isn't that a sort of redundancy in a way, you know?
it is redundant. It's mostly redundancy.
So then, is there really this doubling of information, or is it just the doubling of redundancy? You know, it's like
Redundancy.
we get swamped with all of this so-called new stuff, but it's not useful. It's not information, right? In the true sense of it being novel, you know.
Right. Right.
So it's the illusion of the doubling of information.
That's a good point. And I mean, I think there's some novelty hiding in there somewhere, like in very tiny amounts. But yeah, no, that's an excellent point.
Okay, I've found the Robert Anton Wilson thing, which totally meshes onto this, right? So he calls it the jumping Jesus phenomenon. So our psychic universe is expanding even more rapidly than the physical universe. Let us define the measurement of known scientific facts in the year 1 as one Jesus, using the name of the celebrated philosopher born that year. So he's just arbitrarily starting at 1,
Yeah.
1 AD. Before going any further, let us ask how long it took to arrive at one Jesus. One way of estimating is to take the estimated age of Homo sapiens, in which case it took 40,000 to 100,000 years. How long did it take to double this accumulation of knowledge? To achieve two Jesuses, it required 1,500 years until 1500 AD. How long did it take to double again and obtain four Jesuses? It required 250 years, and we had four Jesuses in our larder by 1750. Next doubling took place 150 years, and by 1900 AD, humanity had 8 Jesuses in our information account. The next doubling took 50 years. 1950, we had 16 Jesuses. Next 10 years, by 1960, we had 32. Next doubling took 7 years. By 67, we had 64 Jesuses. Next doubling took 6 years. By 1973, we had 128 Jesuses. There's no reason to imagine that the acceleration had stopped. Thus, we almost certainly reached 256 J around 1978-79 and 512 J in 1982. In short, we are living in a mental transformation space that is an omni-dimensional halo expanding towards infinity in all directions, and the electronic center of this halo of mentation is possibly everywhere. It is available to you right where you're sitting now. Just plug in a terminal. The machine doesn't care who or what you are.
Yeah, there you go.
But that's the thing, right? Like, it's like, do we have a whole Jesus coming? Like it's a bunch of it's a bunch of noise and redundancy. But is
It's like it makes me think of the noise introduced every time you make a copy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
talking about duplication, right? And so every act of duplication but it's also you have a redundancy of Jesuses, right? So
mm-hmm.
so it's I mean, he's kind of making your point at this, but maybe not even aware of it. It's true. He is kind of asserting that this is all novelty, or it's all these Jesus, each new successive Jesus or pair or powers of two or whatever you want to call it is novel, but he keeps using the same name at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that's a good point. Yeah, but McKenna's doing the same thing, right? Like he's saying that as we get towards 2012, in his view, it's like we're going to go through the same amount of novelty as whatever he said, like the huge compressed period from the time of Rome to the medieval period or something like that. The period just gets more and more and more compressed, right?
Yeah.
But obviously that's not happening. It's like we're not inventing just civilization shaking inventions constantly. We're not doing, like, we come up with different versions of the iPhone every year, but that's
but the first iPhone was, I would argue, was definitely a civilization shaking invention. I mean, putting a supercomputer that's connected to a worldwide network in the pocket of 2 billion people, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Although it's not continuing to happen at that level all the time, It's like
no, I mean, it's now. I mean, the effects that it's had on our society are clear as day now. Like it's old news that we exist in this crazy hyper-connected world, and there's so many adverse effects that it's had on us. That's we've been talking about that, since 2010.
Yeah, for sure. It's not, though, that every year we're coming up with a complete paradigm-changing invention like that.
No, I mean, I'd say that the smartphone and social media are the two biggest things in our lifetimes, I would say. I mean, maybe the internet itself, but I think that the internet for its early years was, the marketing for it made it sound like what it is today, not necessarily what it was then,
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Like the idealistic period.
Right, exactly. And more, I find myself repelled by it. And
yeah, me too, almost. Like, aside from things like this, like what we're doing right now,
Yeah, I mean, I would never, we wouldn't be talking right now if it wasn't for the internet.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we know each other.
The civilization would have fallen apart from the coronavirus pandemic if it wasn't for the internet.
Yeah.
Like imagine trying to deal with this situation, worldwide pandemic in the 80s or something,
Well, they did it with the Spanish flu in the 1910s, and they managed.
I guess you could, at the level of complexity that things are now, could. Like
in some ways, you could say the internet has either exacerbated the problem of coronavirus or exaggerated it. I mean, depending on, there's obviously tons of conspiracy theories out there, and people thinking, David Icke going around saying it's all a hoax and.
Yeah. So even aside from that, though, it's like just bracket that part, that maybe it's a hoax, although it's hard, you can't bracket any of this, right? But but if you do bracket that and just look at it's similar to the idea of that the Depression in the 30s, the huge Great Depression in the 30s, people were able to cope with that because most of the people at that time were still agrarian. They're still farmers, basically, right?
Yeah.
And so and even people that weren't knew how to grow a garden, and they had land to grow a garden on, whereas if that happened again now, we'd be there'd be like food riots like all over the place. It's like
right.
So it's a similar thing, like at the level of complexity that we are now as a society. If we didn't have the internet, like so many people, you wouldn't be able to go to work. I guess it just wouldn't be possible to have lockdown as a response for it.
Right.
But I suppose it's I I suppose they're doing it in places like India, which aren't as complex, you know. So
Yeah. Well, I guess parts of India. But yeah, I don't. Sorry, I got distracted for a minute. Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, the internet. It's I miss what the like. I feel like on one of these podcasts I talked about this, but basically like the internet sucks now. You know, in general, it's like
it does, yeah.
it used to be so vibrant and there was that Wild West quality to it, and
It used to be everything was free, you know. It's like
everything.
I just remember year by year it was getting better and better and better. Like everything was getting like
Yeah.
and now it's just getting worse and worse and worse, you know. Like more and more paywalls and inability to like I can't see news anymore almost, you know. It's
No.
like it
All news is playing the same game, the same attention and engagement game that social media is playing. It's just, I mean, I can barely stomach the New York Times anymore. It's just
I was
so.
just talking to a friend of mine about that today. Like Washington Post and New York Times have just become tabloids.
Yeah. And the worst is like they, for years, while they, you know, in the early stages of them transitioning into that model, I was completely on board. I was like, yeah, this is just, you know, I'll take some more worldview reinforcement. Thank you. You know, like, and you know, I was being duped. And I think it's funny, like these algorithms are so smart that they are, and so effective that they can target the very people who are the most resilient to that type of manipulation, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
and because I always fancied myself someone who is, you know, smart enough or just discriminate enough to know when I was being manipulated like that and not fall for it. But man, those people, it turns out, are some of the easiest to manipulate. It's like, I mean, with these new tools, it's remarkable.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why I forced myself to get off social media, because it's just like, man, these guys really know how to push my buttons in ways that I'm powerless to, you know, right? At least that's how I feel. And the only power I have is to just turn it off, you know, because it's so alluring in that kind of way.
Well, yeah, Facebook is a perfect word for it. You know, it's superficial. You know,
Exactly.
just face value, and that's it. It's like an envy producing machine or something.
It is, exactly. That was one of my biggest problems. Or have you ever? My mom once told me the difference between jealousy and envy.
Mm.
If you're familiar with that distinction, I always use the words interchangeably, but there's a very specific difference.
Yeah, I know. I've heard the distinction, and I was going to make a distinction, but I think what I am going to say is not correct. Like I was going to say that jealousy is towards people, you know, and envy is towards objects, possessions. But I think there's a clearer distinction than that even.
Yeah. So what she told me is that jealousy or envy is specific to something, the object, be it a person or a thing or whatever. The object of your envy is something that it's impossible for you to have. And jealousy is for something that is possible for you to have. So like penis envy.
Interesting, yeah.
Right? Penis envy is something that a woman has because it's impossible. Well, now it's possible, but you know what I mean? Like, so.
No, it would be penis jealousy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I was like, wow, that's
good. Usually it works like that with words, right? Like, there are very clear Aristotelian sort of breakdowns of words. Because that's all they did in the Middle Ages, like the scholastics, like find out the exact meaning of words, clear and distinct meaning of words. That's it. That's a good. No, that's perfect. That's a good one.
Yeah, I love it.
Because it's probably even defined like that in theology. That's probably where it comes from.
Exactly.
Definition,
right? Sin, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So which would be worse as a sin?
Well, jealousy is not a sin. Envy is. And
jealousy is not a sin. Are you sure?
Well, I mean, in terms of the 7 deadly sins,
right?
It's envy, right? And I think that's to your point. I think that they were making a very clear distinction between. Well, there's thou shalt not covet. I wonder what covet is, right? Because covet. Oh, let's see here. Let's look at Wiktionary, my favorite website. Covet. Presumably modified. Okay, wait. To wish for with eagerness, to desire possession of, often enviously. To long for inordinately or unlawfully, to hanker after, to yearn, to have or indulge in an inordinate desire, especially for another's possession. Well, it's both. According to these definitions, I mean, you can have someone else's possessions by stealing it or by purchasing it or trading it, right?
So I'm looking at the etymological dictionary.
There you go.
It says mid-13th century, to desire or wish inordinately or without regard for the rights of others. From the French, covet, desire, lust after. Connected probably ultimately from Latin cupiditous.
Yeah.
Passionate desire, eagerness, ambition. So there's the God. There's Cupid.
Cupid, yeah.
Behind every word, there's a God.
Indeed, there is.
So the desire or wish to desire, to obtain or possess. But let's see. Let's try these words: envy and jealousy. Okay, envious of.
I'd be curious to just Google envy versus jealousy. Yeah, here we go. Envy means discontented longing for someone else's advantages. Jealousy means unpleasant suspicion or apprehension of rivalship. Envy is most often used to refer to a covetous feeling toward another person's attributes, possessions, or stature in life. Many people use jealous to mean the same thing. Interesting.
They give a distinction here too. Jealousy is the feeling which is often had towards a rival or possible rival for the possession of that which we greatly desire, as in love or ambition. Envy is a similar feeling toward one, whether rival or not, who already possesses that which we greatly desire. Jealousy is enmity prompted by fear. Envy is enmity prompted by covetousness. It's interesting. So,
yeah.
So jealousy is more personal then, in this definition.
Yeah. I like my mom's version.
Yeah, I do too. I haven't heard that before, but that makes sense. I'd be fun.
But these are all really interesting too. Like it's even more nuanced in some of these.
Here's a question about jealousy as sin. What does the Bible say about jealousy? Surely resentment destroys the fool, jealousy kills the simple. Do not let your heart envy sinners, but always be zealous for the fear of God. Okay, so yeah, I think it is classified as a sin as well, but I don't know how they're using it. If they're just using it synonymously with envy.
I mean, it's often used interchangeably, and that was the whole point of my mom. Or they're conflated into one definition, right? But which is why my mom told me that.
I think she's probably right. Like, that sounds very...
Yeah, I thought it was a great point. I mean, as soon as she mentioned it to me, I'm like, oh, yeah, that sounds completely obvious now that you mention it. Especially in the context of, like, when she mentioned, she's like, think about penis envy, right? That's something that's impossible for a woman to have. And so that's why it's envy, not penis jealousy, right? And jealousy is, I mean, we get, the whole reason we brought this up is you were saying Facebook is an envy machine or an envy generator. And it's like absolute envy and jealousy, it stirs both of them in their distinct forms, right? Because that was a real problem for me on Facebook, is like how, even knowing that like these people are probably, manipulating their own, how they're projecting themselves out into the world. We all know that there's great examples of, like, some artists have done paintings or whatever where they show someone taking a selfie, but then they show what's happening outside of the frame, and like what they're managing to get into the frame of the selfie has been manicured and curated to look perfect. Right. And as soon as you get beyond that border, they're living in hell or whatever.
Yeah, here's one. Here's the Bible.org. Jealousy versus envy. There is a distinction between jealousy and envy. To envy is to want something which belongs to another person. You shall not covet your neighbor's horse, his wife, or his servant, his ox or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. In contrast, jealousy is the fear that something which we possess will be taken away by another person.
Oh, whoa.
That makes sense too, though. Although jealousy can apply to our jobs, our possessions, our reputations, the word more often refers to anxiety, which comes when we are afraid that the affections of a loved one might be lost to a rival. We fear... Yeah, this actually makes a lot of sense. We fear that our mates or perhaps our children will be lured away by some other person who, when compared to us, seems to be attractive, capable, and successful.
That makes a lot of sense, and that's a much more like when you're being a jealous boyfriend or something, right?
Right.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's really good. Yeah, I like that.
So yeah, I think this is pretty clear. Yeah, so in that sense, then it's not Facebook would be envy and not jealousy, according to this.
Right.
Because you're not afraid of losing anything through anything that you already have through Facebook. You're envious of the things that other people seem to have that you don't have.
Right.
But yeah, in either case, so it's like driven by fear, I guess.
Well, yeah. You can always trace most things back to that, or the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. See if how Facebook works, of course, is that you never you never post anything when you're feeling bad, you know?
Right.
Unless it's sort of a righteous anger that you want people to,
Yeah, I would
to.
argue lots of people post when they're feeling bad
I
or
mean,
angry.
yeah, I shouldn't put it that way, right? Like, yeah, people want sympathy, or they want
Or they
people,
want a virtue signal.
or they want people to feel angry with them,
Yeah.
but, they don't post when, let's see, uh, yeah, they don't post when, like, uh, when you're truly bored, you know, like
Yeah.
if you're truly bored, you're not going to post
I'm truly
something on.
bored.
Yeah, you're not going to say that on Facebook, because even going on Facebook, you're looking for a way out of it.
Right. Exactly.
um, but in that state which we are normally at, it's not only boredom; it's just discomfort and everything else. You know, um,
Right.
you're not going to post something about that.
No.
Like
Sorry.
even yeah, no problem. Even in those in those times when somebody posts something, they're feeling sad or whatever, and they post something on Facebook saying that they're sad, and then everybody chimes in, says, "Oh, I can help you out," and blah blah blah, whatever. Even that provokes envy. You know, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, I wish people were as sympathetic to my own problems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or
Mm-hmm.
or wow, I wish I could even express my own problems like that guy did.
Right. Or wow, I wish that I had this outpouring of sympathy when I felt like this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I wish I could get the same amount of sympathy.
Well, I posted I was sad and I only got 2 comments and 1 like.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You get. I I go crazy with it too. I think everybody does. You know, it's like
It's only natural.
I I said happy birthday to my uncle, and a comment about something that he posted or something, and tons of people said happy birthday to him as well. Um, with everybody else, he individually replied and said thank you and made a little comment. And with mine, he just gave the thumbs up sign. You know, it's like,
Oh yeah.
what's he trying to say? You know, like, maybe, like, is he
I know.
trying to get back at me for giving him the thumbs up about something before, or
Oh yeah.
like,
Maybe. You
it's
know, that's the thing.
it's crazy thinking though, you know, like to think like that. Um,
It's such a waste of mental energy too. It's like,
I know, I know. But yeah,
yeah.
it's something like that. It's inevitable.
Yeah, it's bad. But I've been so tempted so many times to come back because when you leave, you disappear. People are like, "No, where? What? But how am I supposed to talk to you?" Uh, let me make a list of like 9 million other methods that are just as easy, if not
But then you become a rare Pokemon, so that's a
right.
good thing.
There you go. But you know, it's funny. Like I was bemoaning this with Luke a while back. I was reading a book that he recommended, the collected letters of Prynne and Charles Olson.
Oh, I really want to. Yeah, that's the one I keep forgetting about. I gotta order that one.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I was just saying, God, you know, I feel bad for Prynne because he puts so much of his soul into these letters, and Charles responds just kind of like, "Thanks for writing. See you later. Oh, look forward to the next one," you know, or whatever. Uh, but also, just you know, I have several different collections of correspondence from various people, and it's one of the best ways to get at the heart of their ideas, to hear them
Mm.
discussing, to hear them developing them and arguing about them in a slightly more casual format. It's actually, for me, easier to process than their formal writing sometimes.
Sure. Yeah.
And but I was just generally just like, God, why can't I have this level of correspondence with someone? I would love that. Like, I'm envious reading these things, just wanting to have that. Like, I can't believe the effort that these people would put into these letters that would take much longer to reach people. And it's like, we live in a world where this is so simplified and convenient, and no one does this. But I was like, oh, wait a minute. We do this, but we'll only do it. We'll only do it today if it's going to be shown publicly. And it's almost like, now I'm only willing to put in that level of effort if I can benefit, if it somehow increases my standing in my social network. It's like, I want my letters published as I'm writing them. Damn it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but we also have like hour-long Skype conversations.
Oh,
yeah.
No,
Like that. This is kind of the equivalent in a way,
No, that's true. We
Um,
publish those. No,
yeah,
that's true.
we do. Yeah, yeah. We don't need to. We don't need to publish them. Like, there's no. Like, I think with your example, yeah, that's true too. Like, you don't want to waste time communicating just to one person for that long.
Right.
I think that's actually how I started my blog. Is I was sending email back and forth to people, and I was like, why am I doing this all the time? Just start a blog.
Exactly. No, and I think that's the thing. It's like, I can get my complete correspondence published in real time.
Yeah.
I don't have to wait till after I'm dead and anyone cares. I can make them care right now. Right? But yeah. It was certainly a feeling I was having being off social media too. It's just like, oh, where's this interaction,
But yeah, it's true though. If you think of it, Pryn and Olsen wouldn't be able to do this, like just talk to each other for hours on the telephone. It'd be
exactly.
That it's way too expensive to do it, like, yeah.
Yeah. I love Pryn, man. I'm so glad. I think it was Luke that turned me on to him.
Mm-hmm.
That guy's amazing.
You've got his big yellow book?
I do.
Yeah. Yeah, I read through the whole thing.
Wow.
I don't know, like, how much did I retain of it, but I made a lot of notes as I went through, so, but I think doing that, going through, which is, it's chronological, right? So you do start to see some development of language and style and images and symbols, I guess, and start to pick out threads of what he's talking about. I think there's about, what is it, like 3 prose pieces in that whole book, the big prose pieces, which, to me, they really help to sort of break down some of his poems.
Well, I haven't but I've read the prose pieces yet. I'll look for those.
Yeah, he's got one on plants, and then the famous one about the Dreamboat kazoos. I think that's prose. That's his last one. He's got another, I think, somewhere, spacing it. Could whip that book out. I wanted to do a reading of Dreamboat kazoos with Luke, but he thought it was just too much.
Too much what?
I mean, what I wanted to do is I wanted to read it together, and record a conversation, and then try to interpret it in real time together.
Oh, wow.
use that as a podcast or something.
I'll do it with you, and then we can make him envious.
No, we could all do it together. He wants to he wants to get famous, and so we could do that. I think
that's a surefire way to get famous. Reading.
Like I think that'd be a great idea, right?
Yeah, I love doing stuff like that.
Like it would be real time research, real time spontaneous research, and just throwing ideas off of each other and trying to work something out.
Absolutely. No, I love doing that. Yeah, I mean, I'd be open to doing that with other stuff as well.
I mean, yeah, you have these things like book club or whatever, but usually it's normally always you read the book on your own and then you come back and you talk about it.
What would be interesting is to do that in video format and actually like do a screen capture of stuff you may like be looking up. You have the text there that you're reading. You can, annotate live.
We could get to that level, I suppose.
Because that would be really engaging to have that visual component and just to see, like, if you're doing real-time research, just to see the actual research happening and unfolding, because that would add the another layer of realism, and just like because the audio format's one thing, but we're all using our eyes while we're talking, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of yeah. It's like we're sort of doing it tonight a little bit, like looking up envy and jealousy and
yeah, me screen sharing with you and showing you my stuff and
yeah. I think we could start out audio. Like the only problem with video is that it's like I guess you could put it out in the same way, put it on YouTube or whatever, but
you could do both. You could have video and audio versions,
I say just start simple at first, and just the three of us do it audio and in real time and try to figure it out.
Yeah, leave it to me to get ambitious from day one.
Well, it's good. Good to have dreams.
That's my MO. I mean, I'm trying to make a fucking TV show as a complete without any experience whatsoever. So, that's my style.
Well, Alan's doing something similar. He's trying to do a video game without any experience.
Yeah. No, I've been. He and I talked about that the other day. It looks really cool. He showed me his example of one of the game levels traversing a couple pages of your book.
Yeah. So he probably talked to you about doing the music or something, or helping him with the music. Or
I volunteered. I told him that I would help in the music and the sound effects, especially because that's the other half of the audio, right?
Right.
And I do all of that all day.
Would you be willing to do that, like in your off time, doing the same kind of stuff?
Yeah, I told him I would.
I guess it would be different, would it? Because you would have total freedom, I suppose.
Yes and no. I mean, it would be. I would apply the same methods and techniques. I would just adjust to the style in which I'm working. So.
But would it be more fun, or?
Define fun.
I mean,
to the point I was making about my job. Yeah, it would be fun. It would be fun because I'm doing it for a friend. That's what would be fun about it.
Well, okay. Would it be more fulfilling because it's more creative?
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but that I find one of my favorite things to do in my job is to take on the challenge of working in a style or a format or whatever that is just feels really foreign to me that I have, and doing all the research and listen and finding archetypal examples of a style, and so I can really internalize what it means or how it works and what makes it, what are the signifiers of its style, you know.
And that's what you get to do now with your job.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's great. No, I only said that because I remember you saying that you felt that you hadn't done any creative music for quite a
Oh,
long
yeah.
time.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Well, I haven't. And
But that sounds creative, what you're just describing.
yeah, it is creative. And I mean, I guess personal music is maybe a better way to put it.
Hmm.
Cause obviously I'm creative in my job, but, no, I haven't had the desire to make personal music.
Mm.
And, mainly because my creative energy has just shifted in terms of medium. You know, I don't, it's not that like not having the desire to make creative personal music does not necessarily negate the desire to be creative in general. And I still, uh, I mean, that's why I'm doing this writing right now
Mm,
and
mm, mm.
making graphics, mainly because these are ideas I've always wanted to express and felt that it was too expressing them musically. And for me personally, it's too opaque, you know, like that band Secret Chiefs 3, who I probably
Mm.
mentioned to you.
Yeah, yeah.
He guy is extremely deep in all of these topics of esoterics and all of that. Like, whoa, like heavy duty. And he imbues all of his music. I mean, he fills it with that type of stuff, but it's very obscured. I don't hear like just like listening to Schoenberg. I don't listen to it constantly checking that he's permutating his 12 tone row in retrograde inversion or whatever. Who can? You have to sit down with the score and fastidiously and meticulously analyze it to just discover that aspect of its structure. And
Mm.
that's what a lot of music academes spend their careers doing. And to me, that's tedious and not, and too far removed from what I love about music, which is a more visceral, I mean, I enjoy intellectualism in music, obviously, but that stuff that I showed you, the really more atonal Mirthcon stuff, to
Hmm.
me, that's pure viscerality. Like that's my abstract expressionism. You know, I wrote that music completely intuitively. There's no underlying, elaborate academic system underpinning it. It's just me writing what I think sounds interesting.
Yeah, it
You know?
doesn't seem formal, It seems, like I said, it evokes a mood for me, particular type of mood, which is visceral, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
There
yeah,
were there was definitely formal techniques I mean, the one that you said reminded you of that Out to Lunch album,
hmm
that whole opening section, where it's just like the sax. I mean, it's all of this like almost kind of chaotic stuff, or not chaotic, but just almost sounds improvisational. It's not. It's fully composed. But the whole opening minute or so, that piece was, I had, I took, um, I created all these little cells of ideas, musical ideas, and then I mapped out like musical parameters into little groups, like dynamic levels, like pianissimo, fortissimo, and I just wrote down a list of them. I wrote down a list of saxophone extended techniques, like different ways of or like unorthodox methods of generating sound on the instrument. I just made a list of those. And I had a bunch of these very brief little musical figures. I made a list of those. And then I rolled dice
Hmm.
and would be like, okay, the first 2 seconds are going to be this at this loudness level. And I would use dice rolls. This is a John Cage technique, um, to just, to, and so I used chance to determine, I mean, from a limited set of possibilities, right? But that's how I constructed that whole introduction. Um, And so for every, because like when you notate music, you've got to write what's the pitch, what's the rhythm, what's the instrument that's playing it, what's the
Hmm.
tempo, all of these parameters. And um, Cage came up with a system where he would use either I Ching or rolling dice or, some kind of external chance operation to make these choices for him, um, often still based on a limited set of choices. He would create these arrays of choices, and then he would pick one based on, or he would let some chance operation choose from among those arrays, and then he would say, all right, so this first note is going to be C sharp, and it's going to be on the violin, and whatever, all of those decisions were externally made. And the exact opposite of that is a guy like Pierre Boulez or Stockhausen. I sent you some of them. They took Schoenberg's idea of, Schoenberg did this with just notes, with pitches. And that's the whole 12-tone row, right?
Mm. Mm.
He would order the series of pitches, um, in all 12 pitches in a sequence. And that sequence would then generate a grid of the different transpositions of that, and he would use that as the basis of what pitches were used in his piece or in what order they would appear,
Mm.
right? And Boulez and Stockhausen and others took that concept and took it to an extreme where they not only had rows of pitches, they had rows of dynamic levels, they had rows of articulations, they had
Mm.
rows of timbres, they had rows of which register in the instrument's range it would fall in, all of these things. And that's what's called, so Schoenberg invented, like, his style was called serialism.
Mm.
And then Boulez and Stockhausen and others like them, uh, their version was called total serialism, where every musical parameter was governed with this type of serialist method, right?
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, and Cage came came around. He's like, hey, I've created the same insane sounding music by just through consultations of the I Ching. It's like, he didn't create, because each one of these types of pieces in the serialist method, you would define your row, which was the germ that you would then develop systematically throughout your piece. It was almost like your theme, right? Is whatever order you initially begin with. That's you're always going to be working from that initial set of intervals between each note, right?
It sounds like, I know it's not the same, but it sounds similar to the structure of a fugue almost.
Well, it's
Just
taking. I mean,
playing with little pieces, little
mhm.
parts of the fugue, and twisting them around and changing their
Yeah,
speed and order.
yeah. I mean, well, it's sorry, 1 second. It's a progression. It's a logical progression of that tradition. It was like Schoenberg is he's Viennese, and Viennese
Mm.
music established, from Mozart to Beethoven and Bach. I mean, I guess Bach and Beethoven were German, but still, Vienna was always the center of that whole world. And um, this was his groundbreaking. Um, in a way, he was simultaneously breaking from tradition and honoring it at the same time
Mm.
by inventing this new method of theme and variation, right? In a what it did is it broke away from traditional harmony, because the
Mm.
pitches, he called them, he said he liberated the notes of the scale, not bound to the traditional harmonic system that has existed in classical music for hundreds of years,
Mm.
right? In terms of, like, the way in which our ear hears tension and resolution, bum, bum, like that basic cadence that I just said, a perfect cadence or whatever, the way like a Beethoven piece would end, dun 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 ba-dum. I'm just doing, like, there's all of these different plagal cadence and perfect cadence and half cadence and all these things that you learn when you study music theory. Those are all based on Western harmony, which is its own, kind of musically grammatical system of how chords, are supposed to progress, and in terms of their expression of and movement away from resolution, or just the interplay between tension and resolution, right? So a chord resolves. I can demonstrate here. All right, so you have a major chord, right? And then the dominant would be. That's cadence. That's a perfect cadence.
Right.
Blues is based on. Or no, I'm sorry. So the tension is, or the tension would be, waiting. You're like, you can't end there. You've got to resolve it. Oh, okay. There's this, like, the ear naturally is like waiting for that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And Schoenberg completely destroyed that system, but with 12-tone music. So.
Well, it's interesting. I think you were making this point with Jim too. It's like it's basically it's modernist music, right? So these people in music are doing the same thing as people are doing in the visual arts, and people are doing in poetry, and even Crowley is doing in occult studies, right?
Yeah.
Which is it's all about finding limits and transgressing the limits. That's like you have to locate the limits first, and then find a way to go beyond.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's the whole modernist project.
Right. Now, just on a purely gut level, most of my favorite art of any medium comes from that period.
Right.
I love, obviously, like musically, I'm, what happened postmodernistically or whatever is equally intriguing. Just the complete breakdown of and mashup of everything all at once.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. Like Luke's having this discussion about postmodernism. Like what actually is it, and what and how is it distinct from the modern? So if you define the modern as that, like just what we're saying, like finding the limits and then transgressing them, and I think that's a pretty good definition of what modernism is. Then postmodernism is it's almost to the point of self-organization. Like postmodernism is the step that Cage is making, that you're saying, right? Letting the pieces come back together as they will,
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is something that Baudrillard said too, let things play together, instead of trying to find a structure of your transgression, you already have the transgression, and then things self-organize.
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of the postmodern step, I guess.
That's one angle, definitely. It seems to be slightly. It varies a little bit, it seems, from medium to medium in postmodernism. Like postmodernist literature versus postmodernist music, for example.
I know, like for some things, it's basically just hyper transgression. It's not even the next step, So maybe, I'm confused by that too. If
modernism is in the term itself, like there's still like postmodernism implies after modernism, but modernism is in the term itself. It's almost in a way still a progression of modernism, right? It's like
yeah.
Well,
with literature, like people like Harold Bloom would say that it's still romanticism. Like
it's very romantic. It is very romantic.
That's the emphasis in romanticism too, is just going beyond the limits, like that's what it is. Whereas reading something about Joyce being not a romantic, he's a classicist, really. And a classicist is somebody who doesn't try to get beyond the limits, but just tries to see the infinite in what's here already.
Right. Yeah, I like that. I'll buy that.
But yeah, it's it's an important point. Just not just philosophically, but just even in practical terms of what does it actually mean to be postmodern or to be postmodern, if you want to call it.
Yeah.
Like what Cage is doing by introducing the I Ching into the equation. This element of randomness, or not even maybe randomness, maybe something beyond.
He called it aleatoric.
Yeah, okay. So I think it approaches this level that we're talking about before of reawakening the gods,
Yeah, you could put it that way for sure.
Like that's the next step, right? Like a sort of self-organization. The next step beyond that is willfully invoking some spirit, some animistic spirit of whatever it is that you're trying to create or invoke.
Yeah. Did you ever see my introduction to the whole SyncBook world? Alan brought me on to when they still did those monthly member chats.
Mm-hmm.
And this was like right after I met him. And I did a little talk on Frank Zappa's use of what he termed xenochrony.
Oh yeah. I don't know if I heard that. I know about it. Yeah, that was famous. Your talk on that.
What's my talk is famous on that? Oh.
Yeah, that whole talk is famous. Well, in a confined group, but yeah, that's legendary.
Oh wow. Yeah, God, May 31st, 2015. Yeah, that was within weeks of me randomly emailing Alan saying, "Hey, let's talk." Oh, no, sorry. I just sent that to my wife. She doesn't give a shit. It's like, whatever. No, here we go.
So when was that date again? What did you say?
May. 2000? I mean, the video was posted May 31st, 2015. So it would have been
2015. Okay.
Yeah, it would have been like a couple, at least a week prior to that, I would imagine, around then. Well, actually, he was even faster usually at getting that stuff up. But yeah, I just posted it in chat if you ever want to take a look. But it gets into all of this stuff. I talk about Cage and Schoenberg and because my point, I decided to talk about what I've speculated are the, what inspired Frank to try that technique in the first place. And because he was obviously very intimately familiar with those traditions in the avant-garde music scene well before he ever did any xenochrony himself.
Mm. Yeah, I've listened to this ages ago, I guess, but I'd like to listen to it again.
Yeah, I thought it turned out pretty nice. I kept it, very brief. It's like 10 minutes or so.
What was I going to say? Yeah, I was going to mention something. I forgot.
Well, I just realized looking in the chat here, I didn't tell you my Ptah theory, so I could tell you that why you think of what you're.
Oh, it's gone. I won't, unless something that you say reminds me of it. It's Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, it's just so if you open up that image, you can get a closer look at the non-pixelated version of Ptah. So, something that's unique about Ptah in terms of his portrayal in Egyptian art is that he's the only god. Well, him and Osiris, actually. Sorry. Well, let me see. Wait, hold on. Osiris. Where is it? I think so. Yeah. Okay. Him and Osiris are the only ones. Let me share my screen. So, if you look at this image of Osiris and you look at this image of Ptah, notice how their legs are shown in perfect profile.
Yes.
Right? And any other god depicted in this style would have at least another foot visible down here, like just a tiny little line down here. And typically they would be in a full angled, like the leg would be one leg would be outstretched, right? Every other Egyptian god would be portrayed like that. In fact, if I can find, let's look at, I don't know, Nephthys or something like that. What's your name? Yeah, Nephthys.
Nephthys.
Yeah, see, so look at her feet here, right?
Right.
Or what's another one? Seth.
Isis. It's Set.
Oh, Set.
Yeah, but you need to say Set. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. His feet are extended, right? So, and also you see and they all have the same skin color except for Ptah and Osiris.
Both green.
They're both green. And in my interpretation of a lot of I actually got my local library back in San Francisco to do an interlibrary exchange and get this really old book on Ptah, like all about Ptah, and read all about him. Where is this? I want to stop sharing my screen. Oh, why not? Actually, it's fine to look at that. So a lot of the stuff I read, because you read any one of these stories or myths or whatever, and if you start trying to collect different versions of these stories by different authors, supposedly, or just different translations or whatever, you start noticing there's a lot of variations, right? I mean, this is typical with all ancient texts, right? And so what I started to do is to kind of compile an amalgam of all of them, right? And what I realized is, well, long story short, my take on that amalgam, my interpretation of that amalgam with Ptah is that this is when I was, kind of fancifully entertaining the theory that ancient Egyptians knew about evolution.
Right.
And that Ptah actually represents the classic kind of iconic, the first fish that crawled out of water. Okay. And was basically just and then lived on the surface as just this kind of blob. Okay. Because actually, if you look at some of the other aspects of Ptah, let's see. Another way in which he is portrayed. Oh, they don't have it here now. Where'd it go? But he's actually, another one of his aspects is as this little, almost like thalidomide baby kind of looking kid, like dwarfish little just blob of a child, like this disfigured Ptah dwarf. Yeah, let's see.
Well, okay,
yeah, sometimes portrayed as a dwarf.
just a second.
Yeah, here they are.
Got,
here they are. Yeah, this is a good one. That's a good one. Just this little, almost blob of a little person or something like that. So, and I kind of interpreted that as, like almost like the Jabba the Hutt, or just this blob of this gelatinous kind of life form as this almost protoplasmic kind of amoeba-like blob of living, or of an organism.
Just not to interrupt, but I'm just thinking when you are talking about this, is the Greek god Proteus, who was the king of Egypt. Like, he was a sea god. This whole idea of protean,
Right. Right.
And he could change forms. He could he's mutable.
Yeah.
And he was associated with Egypt. So I'm wondering now if that's a similar route. Is
another aspect of Ptah, right?
Yeah.
So, but then there's, the goofiest part of my theory, but I think is pretty interesting, is like if you're in keeping with this idea of this first fish, or this mud fish, or whatever you want to call it, that made the transition from sea to land. If you're obviously, in order to whatever organism had, obviously you can't isolate a single organism, but let's do it for the sake of convenience. If we were to talk about that organism being able to do that and survive, it would have to be able to breathe air, right? And so if you are underwater for a long time and you finally make yourself up to the surface, what's the sound that you're going to make? So that's the end of my. I mean, it's silly, but not at the same time. I don't know. I mean, this is the kind of stuff. Actually, right around the time that I contacted Alan and made that video, that was the type of stuff I was definitely thinking about back in the day. And the Isis and Osiris myth also, I think, is equally varied. If you do your research, you find so many different versions. And
well, the interesting thing that Ezra Pound talks about, and he gets this directly from Greek myth, the idea that at some point metamorphosis was more prevalent, that things could change their form.
Right.
And so, yeah, of course this is not scientific at all, right? So we're dealing with a kind of idealistic worldview, right? Like
Sure.
But what this means is that at some point, things could flip from one thing to another. Things were more protean. Yeah. And things could move from animal to human to God to whatever, right? To trees. Like it's Ovid's Metamorphosis, but then at some point, people cease to believe in that, and then you get this idea of creation first, like creation from God, maybe this idea of emanation, right? And then eventually that goes into a more materialistic view of evolution. But at some point, maybe in the past, things were fluid. They moved from form to form.
Right.
This makes sense to me. It's like it doesn't make sense scientifically, but it makes sense. It makes sense metaphorically.
On a long enough timeline, it makes sense scientifically.
Yeah, I don't even want it to make sense scientifically, because I think science is just it's just a more recent development of it, of these ideas. It's like
Right.
So in general, I just see science as the most recent story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all just a story of stories. So if you want to look at an evolution, it's the evolution of stories more than anything else.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So this is the thing. Like, if we try to, this happens a lot where people go back to ancient mythology and say, see, these guys believed in UFOs, or they saw UFOs or whatever. And it's like, no, they didn't see UFOs. UFOs are our concepts. It's like we have the concept of the UFO. It's like for them, there were no UFOs. Like they don't have the same idea of the cosmos even as we do. It was something different. They might be similar in the coming from a similar space, but no, it's not. We just can't translate our scientific terms
right
into a primitive worldview, or even a medieval worldview, or
right.
Renaissance worldview. Like you read Renaissance texts, and it's just like they don't make any sense at all.
I know.
But they do. They have their own sense.
Yes, of course they must.
And actually, they are more coherent than the modern worldview, because coherence was a part of their worldview.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Meaning that in the modern view, we don't have to come up with a coherent system. It's fine that there are bits and pieces of things that we cobble together, and that's fine. It's sort of an ad hoc thing. But the medieval worldview and even the Renaissance worldview it needed to be a holistic system.
Right.
But then, reading about Egypt, or trying to even consider what the Egyptians thought, it's just like it's completely psychedelic, It's
and you can have a lot of fun just projecting, and that's what I was doing when I was doing all my Ptah research.
For sure, yeah.
Just, and especially once you the process I was doing of kind of mapping the variations in the different versions of the same story. when you pinpoint those, and you pinpoint the differences and the similarities, that reveals a whole another level of interpretation that you can take. And if you trying to find a unified thread between them and trying to find the dividing line at the same time offers, different perspectives.
Yeah, it's just endless. Like, I was just reading about the Egyptian mythology. It's like that, where it's contradictory. It's like, and there was no problem with contradictions.
Not only that, it comes from such a vast, actual span of time. That it was only natural that there would be so much variation and development and retroactive what's the term, retconning, retroactive continuity, like be added in a later dynasty, and then you start seeing the names of gods, that they become these hyphenated version, of like they're like they start combining names of multiple gods into a new version that is simultaneously aspects of all those gods, but also a new god all entirely. And it's so rich, because if you believe Graham Hancock, there's like 8,000 or 9,000 years of history there alone.
Mm.
depending on how far back you date it.
Yeah, and
But
then like even Greek mythology, there's so many different versions of the
right,
same myth,
right,
which what that means is that I think this is what I think this is this idea came with Levi Strauss, is that it keeps it all fluid and it keeps it all alive in a certain way, because
yeah,
there's so many different ways to fit it all together with itself, depending on which variation of myth. Um,
right, right,
Whereas you have something like the Bible, and it gets fixed. It gets fixed in order to preserve its truth, apparently, but it ends up killing it in a way,
right.
because there's only one possible interpretation.
Yep. That same is true with the Quran and the Torah. I mean,
hmm Like, really, there's not, like
right, of course not.
and that's what the Kabbalah is all about,
I
but
love
yeah.
that. I mean, you can even go to a Bible website and type in a verse and chapter of a book, and it will output 60 different versions of that same chunk of
hmm
text,
Yeah, it's
and
great.
and show the source, and it's really fun to read all of them in a row and just
Yeah, yeah.
pick all the differences. I was doing that because I was certain that there was another reference to my to support my baculum theory in the Bible, and I found it, but it's not overt. It's actually the interpretation that kind of supports my theory is found in some obscure volume of the Hebrew midrash
Huh.
texts. But basically, there's a moment where, if the original covenant with Abraham is all about circumcision,
hmm
and later on, I think it's in Kings 1, um, Elijah is on a mountain, and God tells him to, I can't remember the exact context of why, but God reminds him of the covenant with Abraham, and so, or tells him to be reminded of it. And so Elijah gets down on his knees and bends over and buries and like puts his head in between, like bows his head down in between his knees. And in the Midrash interpretation of this part of the Bible, it's saying that, like, what was it exactly? Well, the whole point is that God is telling Elijah to look at his penis
Huh.
to be reminded of the covenant,
hmm
right? That to be reminded that he's circumcised.
Hmm.
And why would he need to look in that? Why would he need to look at his penis at that particular contorted angle? And the idea is that if the word for rib in the Adam and Eve story was mistranslated from a euphemism for baculum, and that God removed Adam's baculum, thereby causing the phallic raphe, which is the scar tissue on the bottom of the penis,
hmm
like that ridge on the bottom of the penis, and biologically they say that scar tissue is formed while the fetus is developing, and at the moment that the hormones or whatever that are released that declare that the fetus is going to be male or female, there's this tearing in the skin tissue that occurs that gives rise to the genitals, and that's where that scar comes from. But this Zion Zevet guy, who actually is the first guy to posit that the word for rib was mistranslated from baculum, is saying this is a biblical explanation for why the the phallic raphe exists, right? Just like other body parts are like the navel, for example, was explained in the Bible, like why it's there. And so if Elijah is having to bend all the way over to look at the underside of his penis to be reminded of the covenant, he's got a perfect view of his phallic raphe.
Huh.
Yeah. So I looked at, which is compelling in the context of this theory, you know, and it's the only other instance in the entire scripture that I was able to locate that has any even remote reference to this. And so, yeah, I looked up this particular passage and read like 60 different versions of it, and they're all basically the same. They basically say the same thing, but some of them more overtly describe the kind of contorted position he's in. Some of them just say, oh, he gets down on the ground, but some of them are more specific, saying he puts his head in between his knees and he's looking up underneath his crotch. Basically, I mean, they don't say that, but you can infer that from the more specific description of his position. Which I thought was awesome. I was like, yes, I found got more proof. Obviously, you know, I'm obsessed with that theory, and I just love it. I just think there's just so much you can withdraw, or you can, you know, extract from it as a kind of primordial archetypal symbol of the phallus. Like it just loads it with so much more hidden meaning.
Well, I love it. I love it how you tie it into the original form of the original sounds of letters and forms of letters and
yeah. Oh, well, that's how I discovered the word baculum, because I had come up with those eight consonants.
Right.
And I started saying, well, maybe words that are very near, because, you know, I reduce the words, like it's almost like the sigil process. I take a word, I remove all the vowels, and then if it's not one of those original 8 consonants, then one of those consonants reduces back to one of the 8. And I was like, well, what about words that are already like really close, you know, next generation extensions of these original 8 consonants? And I couldn't find anything with all 8. The only word that contains all 8 is the word unscrambled that I've been able to find. Yeah. So I broke it in half. So BKLM and NRST. And so BKLM, I started looking for words and that's baculum right there. You know, BK, or, you know, you just the C reduces to the K, but then the B and the L and the M are already there. And so I'm like, baculum, what's that? And I looked into that and I discovered this guy's book where he's like, oh, baculum, you know, or like the word rib was mistranslated. And I was like, what? This is cool. And so to me, just the multiple aspects of that type of like low level kind of archetypal significance linguistically and religiously and symbolically just all came to a head. It was like an phenomenon, you know, the archetypal phenomenon, where all of these things coincide from different media and
the fundamental consonants boil down to our cock bone.
Yep. Well, that's, I mean, and just the idea that, you know, removing that is the invention of the gentleman. So to speak.
Yes, that's right.
And that's why the Arthurian legend, I believe, is another baculum story of, you know, the knight who is worthy pulls a sword out of a rock. You know, just, it's like the man who is worthy pulls the bone out of his cock. Right?
Yeah, and then, but plus that's also connected to the like the leg wound of the Fisher King, which is probably a groin wound, you know?
Oh, fuck!
And that goes all the way back. Like that's primordial, you know?
And he gives him a cup.
Yeah, and that's what causes that ties into what Alan's into, you know, the wasteland. You know, that's why the wasteland comes about because he's wounded in the groin, the Fisher King.
How does the wasteland come about from that?
Well, it's the idea that the king's health, the nation's health depends on the king's health, and
right.
the nation is afflicted in the same way that the king is afflicted.
Right. So society is afflicted in the same way that.
Yeah, the rulers are afflicted, right?
The patriarch is afflicted. Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. I hadn't. Oh man.
So there. This one. So, yeah, if you get into that, then it's like Shakespeare. Like Ted Hughes has written a huge book on all of this, looking into Shakespeare and how it's his book is Shakespeare and the Goddess of Complete Being, which I think Luke does not like, but
there's a lot we like Luke doesn't like.
I haven't read this yet. I've just leafed through it. I know the mosquito. I know the idea of it, but so he traces this right back to the story of Venus and Adonis.
Oh wow!
And it goes further back than that, like that Venus and Adonis is it's based on earlier stuff.
Awesome.
But this idea that it's usually the pig, the wild pig who wounds the hero or the king in his leg, and it's actually his groin. So uses, like, the wild pig uses its tusks to basically take out the hero's genitals.
Oh wow!
But
man, this is expensive.
So if you could fit pig into your theory somehow, maybe pig makes up the missing consonants. What is it? NRST? Is there anything piggish about that? Swine? No.
I'll look into it. Yeah. Well, the other part is nursed. Like
nursed, yeah.
So after you remove your baculum, it has to be nursed. There's also unrest, isn't there one? Or insert, treason, Saturn. There's a lot of words. Yeah.
NRST. Let's see this.
Nourished is in there. Yeah. No, I mean, there's I've got lists and lists of this of possibilities, as you can imagine. Yeah, I want to check out this Ted Hughes book. It's $50 though, or £50. Jesus.
No, I'm sure if you went to a shop, you could find this.
Yeah, I'm sure I could. And I would try other means, but I vowed to stop. But I can afford it, so I can. The paperback edition is £24, but it's not released yet. That's too bad.
No, I just meant going to a used bookstore or something in London, trying to find it. I'm sure you'd find cheap copies.
Yeah, for sure.
This one I noticed, I got it used, and the paper at the beginning is falling out.
That book, the Ted Hughes book?
Yeah. So I didn't notice that before. Nursed. Okay, we'll try to find that. The connection of nursed and the pig. Wouldn't that be great if it was you had baculum and I wonder if this is related to Tusk at all. Tusk.
Oh, well, Tusk. Oh, well, that's a whole other. Actually, yes, it is totally related, especially the word Tusk. And we don't have time for me to explain my Tusk theory. But yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, the tisk. It's the actual linguistic term of tisk is. I if you go to Wikipedia, all right, here, let's look at this real quick. Let me share screen. TISC. TISC, a dental click. Here we go. Oh, look at that. The symbol for a dental click is just a rod. This thing, right? And I have a whole theory that it's like a motherese, because there's the whole motherese theory as the birth of language, right? It's like the mother putting down her baby and needing to put it out of her sight while she's hunting or whatever, right. and started vocalizing. And tisk is this kind of expression of disapproval, and I think it's like that sound, the tongue click, is because there's many different clicks that we can produce with our mouth. There's that, there's the like the horse giddy up.
Yeah.
And then there's the tisk, right? Yeah, exactly. And in my quest for the ultimate fundamental prototypical kind of symbol set, that one is like at the core of, Gaia's disapproval, Mother Earth, just the ultimate mother archetype saying naughty, naughty, naughty. It's also the shaking, wagging the finger.
Same form.
Yeah. And the symbol used for it is an L, is a lowercase L or a capital I, basically, but just a rod and or a pipe, you would call it in typography, which is phallic, and the mother, in all my Adam and Eve reinterpretations, is the one removing her son Adam. Mother Eve removing son Adam's baculum, and she's got this rod now. Because if you look up the word baculum in Wiktionary, it means from baculum, walking stick, cane, staff, scepter, rod, stick, cudgel. I've even seen magic wand. But yeah, so tisk is definitely related to that.
Well, yeah, so if we bring it to tusk, tusk is the same shape as well.
Right. Oh, and that reminds me of the Ptah theory I didn't even mention. Like, there's this whole thing about his rod is made up of three symbols. There's the dog shape, which is his head, or that shape up here, and the feet down here. There's this blue, and there's the jed, which is
the jed. Here, yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Right, and that means that's based on like the spine, the vertebral spine, and it means being upright or supported. And he's wrapped in this clothing because he's this blob that is ultimately going to be an upright walking man, right? A bipedal man. So there's like that whole symbolic trajectory embedded in the symbolism of him. And the other, that's the whole point of the baculum, is that it's an instinctual erection, a support of being upright, right? And it's also Osiris with his glass penis, his gold penis that Isis crafts, right? That, because he can't get it up, because that's the one thing that's missing. She reassembles him and she fashions a gold phallus that is metal, literally, and doesn't need blood to be erect.
Engorged.
Yeah. So there's so many tie-overs. That's why it's just limitless, man. Like, I love this theory. So on that note.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
It is a lot to think about, man. But yeah, I'm excited. It makes me. It's just a great.
It makes you belch.
It makes me burp, and it gets me hard.
Well, no, it keeps you from getting hard.
Yeah, it's nature's Viagra is what it is.
It, mm,
Mm-hmm.
the poet's wand.
That's right. The pen is mightier than the baculum.
Well, it's a whole thing. I was just writing this essay on Frances Bolderoff, who's a crazy scholar of Joyce, and she ties in all this stuff like Berkeley and Bruno and Blake and everything else, everything that I've been interested in, and she's done it decades ago, and she
Yeah.
was the lover of Charles Olson as well,
Oh, no kidding. Oh, wow.
yeah, they did they corresponded for decades,
Wow.
she probably inspired a lot of his poetry and his poetics, like projective verse and all of the poetics that Olson's known for. It's like you can trace it back to her ideas.
Huh.
But what was I saying before that? Yeah, no, she's talking about Ulysses. Yeah, at the end. Well, at the Circe section of Ulysses, and the sort of climactic moment of that is Stephen Dedalus takes up his staff, and it's modeled directly off of the old poet's wand of the Druids, the
Mm-hmm.
Druidic bards of Ireland, and
Mm-hmm.
he smashes this. He has a vision of his dead mother, and she's kind of making him feel guilty because he's no longer a Catholic, and
Oh, she's tutting him.
yeah, tutting exactly, and so he smashes her image, and happens to shatter this chandelier. He's in a whorehouse. He smashes this chandelier, and it's the shatter of all time and space.
Oh,
So
wow.
he's using the baculum to destroy time and space, which ends the wasteland. That's the
Shit.
climax of the book.
Holy
Um,
shit.
I know.
God damn. See what I mean? It's everywhere.
Yeah. No, if you tie it to the Fraser stuff, the King Kill stuff,
Right?
then it's just endless.
It's
Like that.
endless. Yeah.
That's. It could actually be that's the missing part of it. The missing part of it.
That's my big. That's why it gets me so excited. Is that it seems like this is some lost, potentially just lost story of it all. And that, and or like fundamental kind of element that ties it all together. You
Like
know.
like yours. Yeah, the Isis and Osiris myth doesn't make sense without a penis bone, almost.
Yeah.
Like
Exactly.
like otherwise he just loses his little floppy dinky.
Yeah. Right.
And it's
Right.
like that's not a big deal, really.
Yeah. I mean, it would suck, but
I know, yeah.
stay stumpy.
But
Well, I should go. I've got to go pick her up now. But
okay, yeah, it was good.
yeah, it was great, and thank you for reading my script. I appreciate it. It's encouraging
Oh,
feedback,
oh, it was
especially
fun. That was good.
from a non-TV guy. That always is nice. And I can't wait to get your book, man. I'm so excited.
Yeah, me neither. I haven't got it yet. Well, I've got the proof copy, but I want to get the actual. I ended up I'm sending out all these author copies, but they take a lot longer. So I'm able to order it now from Amazon.jp, and it's going to arrive on Monday. So I
Oh
just got an
wow.
extra copy for myself.
Well, fuck it. I'll order a second copy so I can give it away.
Oh well, yeah. If you want to do that, like yours is
Death,
coming on, but
Death Sweat.
of the
There it is.
poster.
Oh, it's the second. The first thing that comes up is a hoodie, and the second thing that comes up is when I just type Death Sweat.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like Death Sweater or something.
yeah. All right, I just bought it.
Oh really? Okay.
Yeah, why not? I gotta, I gotta show my support.
Well, thank you.
Oh, it's just very exciting, man. And you must be really proud and relieved that it's finally done.
I am relieved. I don't know how proud I am. Like it's a weird thing, you know. I don't like their early essays. In a way, I feel distant from them. But reading it over in the proof copy, it all became significant again
Yeah,
for me. So I was happy about that. But
very good.
I still have no idea how it's going to be, how people will respond to it. You know, like it's a weird
See,
thing.
well, we'll find out.
Mm.
All right,
Okay.
man.
Yeah. Take care. It's been great.
Yeah, as always. And
So yeah, let's plan to get Lukey on here
yeah,
sometime.
absolutely. And until then, I'll see you on the epic thread.
Hmm. The ever bifurcating thread.
Yes, indeed. All right,
Okay.
man.
Yeah. Take care. Have a good day.
You too.